Welcome to the SubHub podcast. I'm MK Sullivan, and Dani is going to be on this interview as well. I'm just recording the intro by myself today. And like we mentioned in the other episode, if you've already listened to it, we are doing 2 episodes this week because Dani and I were both on vacation last week and did not plan to pump out any podcasts. So you guys get 2 for your long runs this weekend. But we're super excited. Today's guest is Dani Aravich. She's a Boise native who's conquered both the summer and winter Paralympics. She was born without her left hand and her forearm. Dani's journey took her from high school cross country to collegiate track and field at Butler University, eventually to the Paralympic track and field, and then to Paralympic skiing as well. She became a dual sport athlete after having competed in Tokyo in 2020. And her story is quite funny in that sense. And her journey to Beijing Paralympics in 2022 is super cool. In 2023, Dani won her first Para-Nordic Skiing World Championship medal and now focuses primarily on Nordic skiing. But in her off-season of Nordic skiing, she'll be joining us for plenty of trail races this summer. She talks with us a little bit about her schedule. She's also a trailblazer in inclusivity. She's working with the U.S. Golden Trail Series to work on just inclusivity for athletes with disabilities in our space, which is super cool. And we talk about that as well. And she is also a member of the trail team this year. So hopefully you enjoy our chat with Dani because we really enjoyed talking with her.
And welcome to the pod, Dani. We're so excited to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get to talk to y'all. Y'all are awesome trail runners, so I feel honored that you even asked me to chat.
Oh my goodness. Well, you're a part of the trail team now. You have trail in front of your bio, basically. So we had to. You're one of us now.
I am. I've been sucked in, failed at elite track and field. So now I ended up in trail running. No, it's awesome. It's like adult cross country, and cross country running in high school is what made me fall in love with running. I think that, trail running is just like the best community. I like people who can drink a beer after they do a hard activity. Everyone else is a little too uptight.
Don't worry, you will still find plenty of those people in this space too. But I'll drink a beer with you after at least. Dani probably will too.
Heck yeah.
This Dani. We had 2 Danis on the pod today, and I'm on my Zoom screen. I'm like in the middle of them too. So it's like a little Dani sandwich, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, let's start off by just like talking about early life. You were just saying like that cross country kind of got you into the love of running and the love of sport. Have you always done sports? What does that look like for your background?
Yeah, I was born missing my left hand and forearm. And my parents didn't know really anything about disability, didn't know anyone with a disability. And so they treated me like any other kid, and that meant getting involved in sports at a young age. I think we all played pee-wee soccer at age 3, where you run in circles and don't actually really do much, which led into basketball and softball and lacrosse, horseback riding, really any sport I could do. For a long time, I really latched on to soccer and basketball. And it was while I was in high school that my teacher was the cross country coach, and he saw me playing soccer, and I was a midfielder. So I was probably running 5-6 miles a game anyways. And he encouraged me to come out for the cross country running team. I think that a lot of people, when you first look at running as a sport to compete in on its own, it's intimidating because running for every other sport is often a punishment. It's incorporated in the sport, or you're having to run as a punishment for something. And so it was kind of foreign to think about just running for actual sport. And I started cross country my junior year of high school, and I did well for someone who's brand new at it, and that ultimately led me into track and field. That ultimately led me just 2 years later into Division I cross country and track and field.
I love that. I know I remember in high school personally, you would go to the cross country meets and they would have, the t-shirts with the quotes, and the most common one being like, my sport is your sport's punishment. And and as a bunch of cross country runners who most are, maybe on the nerdier end, just by default of the personalities it attracts. I remember feeling so cool. Like Rihanna's like, yeah, like this is your sports punishment. That's really cool. I love that the running coach identified that in you. And then just a couple years later, you're going to a D1 school for running. At that point, was it hard to kind of diverge from soccer? Because that sounds like kind of like the first sport that you fell in love with.
I think that soccer had kind of run its course with me. I had played it then for like 14 years, and I just didn't really see a future for it for myself. And I really thought I would never play a college sport. Like I was very good at being average at every sport I did, but to everyone else, they probably thought I was way better because I was doing it with one hand, but I never wanted to compare myself to my peers who didn't have a disability. So I always felt like that was something I had to excel at with sports because it was a way to earn respect for being so physically different from my peers. And that I think is what also caught my attention in running is it felt like my impairment disability mattered less in distance running. I was able to run with some of the state I grew up in's best at the time. And so it kind of felt like I finally found a place in sports. But then unfortunately when I went to the Division 1 level, I it was just such a jump in training that I had not experienced. I truly didn't know if I loved running at the time. Like I was still so new at it that I wasn't sure if it was the right sport for me at the time. And just my team I was on, um, in terms of socially and kind of the expectations of the team did not feel right. So ultimately, I left the team in college and focused on what would become my professional career and had a hard time figuring out ways to exercise after losing the sports side of things.
The classic student athlete downfall is like if you're not somebody who's like, I'm definitely gonna run for the rest of my life, you're like, what else am I gonna do?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's
Intramurals, I learned.
Oh, that's good. That I wasn't allowed to play intramurals because, couldn't break my leg or something being on the track team. But
That's why
I'm
you
curious.
quit running and then play an intramural.
Exactly. I'm doing it all wrong over here. So it sounds like running like helped empower you as an athlete with a disability. And so I'm just curious, like prior to that, what was it like growing up with a disability and also just like was it ever like pointed out to you? Were kids like mean to you about it, or was it like kind of just something that was normal?
For the most part, I'm very lucky in the community I grew up in. I went to the same school from first to eighth grade, and then we mostly all went to the same high school, very small school system. So it was kind of like we got the hurdle or the awkwardness out of the way at a young age. And then I stayed with those same peers for so much of my childhood. For me, it was always going in public was the worst because I'd see other people staring at me, pointing at me, people would ask questions and I really despised it. So for a long time, I wore a prosthetic arm solely so I didn't have to talk about it because then hopefully, I pulled my sleeve down. You'd only see the tips of this prosthetic arm fingers and people wouldn't give me a second glance. And so in sports, though, it definitely felt like a place that I didn't have to cover it up. And I was able to just be fully exposed, no arm and all in whatever sport I was playing. But I did always have a hard time post competition as a child through high school. Like parents or coaches from other teams would come up to me and be like, that was so inspiring what you did today. And I'd respond and be like, I actually had a really bad game today. Like, I did not have a stellar performance, or I did not do well, or did not score very much. And it was always obviously because I was doing it with one less arm than all the other kids. And I really hated that fact that people found it inspiring or cool that I was just doing the thing. And it's been cool as an adult to learn more about disability culture. And we kind of have a term for that. And it's called inspiration porn. And it's basically viewing people who have disabilities as inspiring, to feel better about yourself as a non-disabled person and putting them in a light that is like, wow, you got out of bed today and you went to the store and you played a sport. And so as a community now, we're trying to reframe it, especially within disabled sports, of always putting the athlete in the sport before the disability. And yeah, you can find someone inspiring who's like doing kick-ass things in their respective sport, but it's not inspiring because of their disability. It's inspiring the things they're actually doing. And so that was something I just really despised in sports growing up, but it allowed myself to feel like I was on an equal playing field as my peers. And, whether I had a hand or not, if I was playing well, like, pass me the ball and I'll go score. And there's only really one truly negative experience that sticks out in my brain. And it was in, I think, freshman or sophomore basketball. We were in like our district tournament in the championship, and I played point guard. And the biggest thing in basketball for me was I'd always obviously have to dribble with my right hand. And so my left side was always exposed. So people would come and try to steal the ball or push me to my left side. So the ball would be vulnerable. And I had a coach say, when he didn't play me very much that game, even though I'd been the top scorer all season, he said, "Oh, I was afraid they'd push you to the left and make a steal." And that to me was so frustrating that I had demonstrated that I had spent so much time with a private coach, spending hours and hours figuring out ways to make moves to avoid that. And that this person, solely because of the thought of the disability and what could become, didn't put any support, or they put expectations that I wouldn't do well, even though I demonstrated I would do well. And so that to me really sticks up in my sports memories experience as something negative, that then I've just continued to be like, especially when I played a sport in college against people who didn't have disabilities, I was like, okay, I cannot let this be ever an excuse, because I am never going to go through that kind of feeling again that coach gave me.
Yeah. You have shared a lot of incredible things. Thank you for sharing that. I kind of had like two two thoughts while you were chatting about, one, like being identified for the inspiration porn, and being like, yeah, you just were out there. Like, that's huge, like, we applaud you for that. And it's not, maybe it's of the same essence, but like little girls being like, oh, you're really strong for a girl. And, it's like, oh, I should automatically be less than because I'm not a boy. And people kind of like using that language towards that. And then the coach using your weakness as a reason for, or not a weakness, but we all have that. Like, yours just happened to be somewhat apparent, but little did he know, or maybe he did know, that you had been working hard on it all year. But you go down the roster and everyone has something. So to like be picked out because of that, yeah, that probably would not be a really good memory for me either. However, I'm curious, like, when we have those really tough moments of adversity or things being meanly said to you, what did anything change in you after that experience?
I think it was probably around the same time that I chose to stop wearing a prosthetic. It was mid high school. The prosthetic I had no use, no functionality other than looking real. So it was just basically like a dead weight arm that was supposed to look like a actual arm or hand. And I was just at the point where I was so tired of wearing it. It felt like I was carrying around extra weight. And for me, ditching the prosthetic, which everyone does not have this luxury of being able to not wear a prosthetic, but it was an opportunity for me to basically show publicly again, like, yes, I do not have an arm or a hand. I'm going to accept being stared at in public. I'm going to accept the questions that might come my way. And it was really an acceptance piece for me. And I think that when I continued to play sports after that experience, I just never wanted someone to be able to use my disability as a crutch again when they looked at me. And sometimes I reflect back and I'm like, I was actually kind of lucky that my thing I was not confident about growing up was very obvious. Like a lot of people, and like you said, a lot of young girls have so many things they might not like about themselves, or they're comparing themselves to others about. But for me, it was kind of just put out there and obvious. Which now as an adult, I kind of think back on that. Maybe that's kind of lucky that almost like my inner demon was on the outside rather than the inside. And it's been cool to see an evolution of how the thing I once viewed as my worst quality, or the least interesting thing about me, or the only thing that people would notice is different, is now kind of has given me so much in sport. Like, I think that, if I hadn't been born without a hand, like, I wouldn't have had these opportunities now that I've had. And so it's a cool to see the evolution. And now whenever I can particularly talk to parents of children who have limb differences, I think that's one of the biggest things, is to let them know, like, your child is going to be okay, and you just have to help them along this journey ultimately to self-acceptance someday.
Yeah, and I guess speaking of talking to like parents, when we were getting to know you on the internet earlier, we saw this clip where you were talking about how because you didn't have a lot of role models to look up to as a kid, your mom would make a scrapbook, and every time she saw an athlete with a disability in anything, she would cut it out and put it in the scrapbook for you. And so I'm just curious, like, because we'll get to this later, but you're a Paralympian and like you're a very successful athlete. So did your community kind of help build that, or was it purely like your parents, or like what gave you the motivation to say, like, oh my gosh, I could do big things?
I definitely think it comes down to my mom and dad, because they they've learned a lot, as I've learned a lot as an adult, about disability and disabled sports and this whole world that exists. And they, in the best way they could, since they didn't know much about it, they did everything in their power to give me opportunity to play sport. But even when I reflect specifically on my Paralympic journey, it was my mom who, with many hesitations when I started it all, like giving up a full-time job with benefits and a 401k to try this whole track and field thing again. And I fell ultimately in my first Paralympic 400-meter race with like 10 meters left, and was just horribly embarrassed. And she's the one who, despite her hesitations, was like, "You cannot end on that. You've barely started. You have to keep going." And I had no desire to. I said, this was clearly my sign. I should go back to work, go back to the structured life that we all kind of have been raised to ultimately live out in the corporate world. And it was her who encouraged me to continue doing it. And so I definitely accredit it all to them. I think, as I reflect on growing up, I'm so lucky I had the opportunity to play sports amongst my peers, because unfortunately, most athletes with disabilities do not, whether it's because of like hesitations from coaches, or the school, or whatever it might be, to ultimately then a wheelchair basketball player is unable to play in a standing basketball game. So I have a very privileged disability, I would say, in that sense, is that I can A, access inaccessible spaces, and B, I had an opportunity growing up to integrate into non-disabled sports. But I think that ultimately helped me become extremely competitive because of that. And I feel very lucky now that in track and field and Nordic ski and biathlon, I only compete against people with similar impairments. So it's kind of cool to think like, wow, I'm finally on equal playing ground with people in my respective sports and categories. But it's cool when I discovered trail running, because I can remind myself that, oh, I can still be really good in a non-disabled sport. Like, I want to show up to one of these races and kick all of your non-disabled asses. Like, and I am so lucky that I have that opportunity to. And that I think is what we're trying to create at a bigger level within trail running and ultimately all of disabled sports, is that athletes who might not be like myself or others who have that opportunity can still find ways to participate in the sport.
Yeah, no, I definitely love all of that. And I would also love you to kick everyone's ass too. Just for the sake of, like, yeah, you're competitive, you want to win, like, you know, get it done, sort of thing. Hey all, Dani here, professional trail runner and co-host of the SubHub podcast. Last year, after getting sick before a big race, I started looking into natural ways to boost my immune system. So I embarked on a little research journey, trying out a few different options. And you know what? I found myself reaching for one set of products again and again. And that was Beekeepers Naturals. And guess what? They are now a partner of the pod. Founded with a mission to reinvent the medicine cabinet, Beekeepers Naturals offers an array of immune boosting products free from harmful chemicals and artificial ingredients. Their hero ingredient is called propolis. It's nature's defender of the hive, packed with antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. While my personal favorite product is the throat spray, they also have lozenges, syrups, and a bunch of great options for kids. So if you're looking for a natural option to boost your immune system, consider trying Beekeepers Naturals products. And be sure to use the code SUBHUB20 for 20% off of all of your orders at beekeepersnaturals.com. Now back to the episode. Kind of going back to, so you go to D1 track and field, and you actually only competed your freshman year, correct?
Mhm.
And obviously the competitive spirit is well and alive. And I'm curious what caused that decision initially, before, coming back to revisit it and then ultimately becoming a Paralympian.
For me, I reflect back and I realize as a freshman in college, an 18-year-old who had just started this sport, moved away from home for the first time, and had true independence for the first time, I just wasn't prepared enough to be an elite level sport emotionally. I don't think physically. I just wasn't mature enough. I think that when we look at NCAA sports and NCAA running now, these athletes are as good as many of the pros, and it is such a high level of competition that is extremely hard to balance with school. I was very focused on the career I would ultimately end up in, and I didn't know if I loved running yet. I enjoyed it. I think a lot to do with my high school cross country experience. Like, we would go on 45-minute runs, race really hard, and drink a lot of chocolate milk and eat a lot of pasta like the night before a race. It was so much fun. And then to make that jump to college, like, I just wasn't prepared enough for that. And I think I just didn't socially get along with super well the rest of the team. The university I went to did a funky recruiting process where they would focus off years, men and women. So one year they'd focus and get like 10 freshman men, and the next year they'd do 10 freshman women. And I was in an off year for women. So it was only myself and two women who were freshmen. And our university had just come off of a third place NCAA Division I cross country women's title. And we just had athletes who were so far apart, like myself, who was pretty new to the sport, and a couple others, to then an NCAA six-time All-American who went to Olympic trials for Rio. Like, we just had a vast span with not many athletes. So you're running solo a lot. And I didn't love it. And I was enjoying other things in college. Like, I joined a sorority and I was involved in my business school and I was giving tours on campus. And those were things at that time in my life that just made me happier. And so that, and some injuries that were pretty tough, made me decide to ultimately leave the team. And I'm very happy I did. I'm happy I had that experience and saw the elite level side, but I'm proud of myself that I was mature enough to make that decision to not stick with something that wasn't making me happy, because then it led me to giving those next 3 years to really focus on what I was going to do, and that was to work in professional sports. I saw the lack of women working in professional sports, and I said, you know what, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to become the first female GM of an NFL team. And it allowed me to have time to do internships, study abroad, and ultimately I got that seemingly dream career in professional sports. And when I was about 6 months in, I don't know what happened to me, but I was like, this is not also what I thought I wanted. Like, this is not fulfilling me how I was told it would. You're told, work this hard, do these internships, get these grades, and network like crazy. So then you can get this job and then you'll start to work your way up the ladder. And I was doing quite well at my job. I was the only one of two female salespeople out of 60 at our organization. And it wasn't fulfilling me like I thought. I had a very unhealthy relationship with exercise because I was working so much. I'm like, when do I fit in exercise? And people still question me about this, but I don't really like to exercise. Like, I'm very happy sitting on my ass, not doing anything. For Nordic skiing now, our off month is April, and some athletes like still continue to train a little bit and stuff, but I take all of April off and I don't bat an eyelash. Like, I really am not motivated by exercise. And when I was in a corporate career, the main motivation for exercise might be endorphins or just staying in general shape, not gaining weight. And none of that really mattered to me. So I just drank wine, sat on my couch after work, and tried to do well at my job. And so it really takes competition to motivate me to exercise. Like, I need to have something I'm training for. And it was, about 6 months into my corporate career where someone talked to me about the Paralympics. And I was just like, what are these? Tell me about these. And it was kind of a harsh realization to be like going from competing only against people without disabilities to now only competing against people with disabilities. That was quite an eye opener. But I started training for track and field for the Tokyo Paralympics back in 2019 while I was working a full-time job, 60 hours a week at my job, 9 to 10 hours training. And it was a whirlwind, but I think I was just always seeking a purpose, and I thought it'd be ultimately with my career, and then I realized it wasn't. And so that's kind of why I sought out running again.
As a former collegiate coach, just to call this back to your time on the team, I respect the hell out of that decision, because there are so many athletes that just like, you're like, why are you here? Like, you don't want to be here, but they feel like they have this obligation to, because they ran in high school and everybody expects them to be like this collegiate athlete. And it's like, you're not happy, which makes me not happy. So like, I respect that decision. That's awesome. A very mature thing to think of as a freshman. So, oh, what were you gonna say?
Oh, my mic also died. Is the audio okay?
Yeah, you still sound good.
Okay, cool.
No problem. So Paralympics,
Mhm.
like, admittedly, I'm a huge track and field fan, but I know nothing about the Paralympic, like how it happens, how you get there. So tell us, like, obviously somebody told you like, hey, you should get into this, but how do you get on the team? Tell us like more about it.
I wish I knew kind of better. It was funny. In high school, I got an All-American letter from Paralympic track and field, and I was just like, we were kind of like, what is this? And someone had mentioned it in college, and I like researched it, but again, it just like, I don't know, it never really came up again. And it's cool to think, I've now since met the woman who sent me who's the program director who sent the All-American letter. And she's like, oh yeah, we wanted you to come out for track and field. And I was like, didn't know, didn't know much about it. And so when I talked to this family friend while I was working corporate, I started, as anyone does, with a Google. And the Googler showed me some handbooks, on like qualification processes and classifications. But for someone who doesn't know anything about it, reading all this is a lot, and trying to like sift through it and be like, okay, well, how do I get classified? How do I end up at a trials? Um, and so it's a very confusing and intimidating process. And that's why development in these sports is so important, is so athletes at a younger age can like understand this and have someone break it down for them. Because if you just look online, like you will read it and go, I don't even know where to begin. Like this is confusing. Luckily, the family friend who talked to me about the Paralympics, she was very well connected with a Paralympic track coach in Spokane, Washington. And shout out David Gregg. He acted as like my mentor then. He told me races I should go to that were eligible to get classified times. He helped me understand the process and just was like such a guiding light for me as I started to navigate it. The first harsh realization when I was looking at Paralympic track and field was, okay, you get classified based off of your disability. You only compete against people with similar disabilities. Easily, as an amputee, could figure out what class I would fall in most likely. Look at the events at the Tokyo Paralympics for that classification. Oh shit, there's only the 100, the 200, the 400, the long jump, and the shot put. And I was like, I can't run any of those. Like, I ran the 2 mile and the 5K. Like, what event can I do? And so I looked at the 400 as I feel like one naturally would based on those options. And I saw the time to get to trials. And I said, I think I can accomplish that time to at least get to trials. It was a very fair time. And I said, okay, I guess I learned to be a sprinter. And so I found someone who ran college track I was living in Salt Lake City at the time. I asked him to help me try to get on a weights plan to be a sprinter. I ended up training at BYU with one of their coaches for a while, and then a retired collegiate coach. And it was always just, let's try to tackle trying to make this former distance runner, into more of a sprinter. And we tried for 2 years, and it kind of worked. It didn't work super well because I overstrided the shit out of that 400. Like, man, you watch my race and you can just see the lack of power I put into the 4 and just overstrided. But it was just a hodgepodge. Like, I'd take any advice and help people would give me. Like, I was never had lifted weights. That was one thing when I reflect on college running, is I never saw the inside of our weight room in college. Like, we did not weightlift as student runners. So I'm trying to figure out how to back squat heavy and all this, all while working a full-time job. And the process, yes, is just so intimidating and confusing. But ultimately, there were things like I realized for the Pan American Games, I think I actually could have qualified for the 2019 fall games, but you had to submit your time. And I didn't realize you had to submit it through this process. And so there was so much to learn. But ultimately, I was able to find some races, hopping college races, nothing like getting absolutely whooped by some college 400 runners when it's like your third 400 ever as an adult, and try to get those times approved to be considered. And then ultimately, I had a time at an approved race that got you to trials, and I was able to race at trials. And that process is also very confusing because, unlike the Olympic trials, you see top 3 finish. Okay, you get to go to the games if you have the qualifying standard. For the Paralympics, not every event and every classification will send someone. And so my trials race, if you were to watch it, you'd be like, oh, she got like third. But those people were not my classification. They combined our classes so that we didn't have to run solo. Like, I think only one other person ran in my same classification. And we have standards that are based off of the third best time, jump, throw in the world from the past 4 years, or the 5th best. And so you're compared to the third best time in the world, and they create a percentage based off of that. So that allows you to rank people across all different classifications. And so that is, I mean, I encourage everyone to watch Paralympic trials and then the games this summer, but it is a lot different because you have to understand these nuances of the classification system. And it's everyone's favorite topic in the Paralympics because ultimately someone else basically tells you how disabled you are or are not. And the goal is for fairness at a competition, but it can be pretty difficult, especially for invisible disabilities, visual impairments, spinal cord injuries, to be able to label you are this disabled. So we say often in Paralympics, while doping still occurs and that is a problem, misclassifications is an even bigger problem. But it is just, yes, I hope to God that any child or any person who wants to try this can figure out the process easier than me and we can make that knowledge more accessible, because there's probably so many athletes we're missing right now who could be on an incredible track in the Paralympics just because they don't know it exists.
Yeah, no, definitely. That is such an interesting concept of someone
Yeah.
else telling you what your disability is and therefore categorizing you.
Yeah.
It's yeah. Um, it is cool that the Paralympics will also be on Peacock this summer. So for those people who do want to watch it, I don't know if the trials will also be on there.
Para
But
swim and para track and field will be on NBC or Peacock.
perfect. There we go. Yeah, I'm excited. I have Peacock. um, so we also, I wanted to backtrack a little bit. That sounds like my worst nightmare, to be honest. If I like being a distance runner my entire life, and then someone was like, "Okay, for the
run a
Olympics, you
4.
actually have to switch to the 400."
You're like, I don't even want to do the 800. Don't put me in the 4.
Oh
But
my
also
God,
like a
yeah.
welcome challenge, right? Because I would be curious, like, oh, how fast could I run in a 400?
Oh, I learned not fast enough, unfortunately.
But you probably could run that same race like 5 times in a row because you're a distance runner.
Oh, I don't know though. There is nothing like the burn of the last 100 meters in the 4.
Yeah,
Like,
no.
loved my first split, look at my watch, like I'm doing great. And then that next, like I can never describe, even now having done some trail races, that wall you hit in the last 100 meters of a 4.
Yeah.
I think personally now it's the hardest race in track and field.
Love
And
it.
so that is why I have respectfully decided never to run it again.
Yeah, that was my next question was, is sprinting and the 400 the reason that you decided to switch to skiing?
Oh gosh, skiing fell in my lap. Like I grew up downhill skiing, just recreationally, never racing. And it's while I was training for track and field and working that basically like Nordic in the US, Nordic skiing in the US is already pretty niche. I think it's becoming more well known because of people like Jesse Diggins, and more successful because of people like Jesse in the US ski team. But throw in the para aspect, it's very niche. And so out of half our team was recruited from a different sport. We have Oksana Masters, one of the most successful Paralympians of all time, came from para rowing, now does paracycling. Someone came from triathlon, someone came from wheelchair racing. And so the concept of recruiting into it was well known, but also more rare for standing athletes. A lot of those athletes were sitting athletes. Whereas when you look at standing cross country skiing, you have 2 techniques, skate and classic. And it is the most technical sport I personally believe in the world. Like you could be the best athlete at whatever you do, and you put those 2 thin sticks on your feet and you're told to move around. Like, it is so challenging. And so I got
Danny and
invited
I
to
have
try
both
it.
tried, and it's bad.
You're not into it?
I mean, I'm so bad at it. I just had to point that out. We have both tried it. It is so hard.
Yeah, I tried it this winter for the first time. I love it though because I suck at it.
Yeah, that's honestly why I went to this camp. I tried it and I sucked. And so then I said, well, I can't suck at this. So how are we going to do better? So my Tokyo preparations for track and field were quite silly because I threw in now this other sport that involved a lot more training hours, developing a different system, fast twitch versus slow twitch muscles, anaerobic versus a sprint. And I just was like, I can't stop until I get good at this. And now I'm entering my 4th year of it and I'm still not good at it. And it pisses me off. And I cannot rest until I feel like I've conquered it. When I first tried Nordic skiing, they said it would take 6 to 8 years of consistent work to learn the technique. And I can just clarify that that statement was probably true because I'm in year 4. And while I've made leaps and bounds, there is still such a unique thing that I have not grasped that my competition has grasped. And it is a funny landscape that you could be so fit, like you could come off maybe a great season of training, and just feel so ready to kick some ass on the snow. But if you don't have the technique, you're not going to move as fast. Like it is all about efficiency rather than ultimately fitness. And it became a challenge. And then I thought I was training for Tokyo 2021 for track, and then suddenly I was training also for Beijing 2022. And I didn't really intend to become a dual sport athlete, and it's just kind of how the cards have fallen. And after Beijing, I had to really look at, there's 3 years till the Paris Paralympics. Like, do I really want to stick with this 400 race? And I ultimately made the decision that the 400 is not for me, and there's just not another race in track. And so, can I give myself some time to get good at this Nordic ski thing?
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Never Second. Although they are a relatively new brand in the space, Never Second has been working with some of the biggest names in trail running over the last couple years, like UTMB champs Katie Scheid and Jim Walmsley. Never Second makes fueling easy with their modular system that allows you to create the exact carbohydrate formula for your activity. Their products are meant to be mixed and matched so that you can have 30, 60, 90, or even 120 grams of carbs per hour. I used Never Second in my recent second place finish at the Canyons 100K, where I also snagged a golden ticket. Despite being pretty nervous and nauseous at the start of the race, I was able to get down all of my nutrition because of the easy consistency and light flavors of Never Second products. I drank 90 grams of carbs over 90-minute increments and supplemented with 1 C30 an hour. I alternated between the C90 mix and a 3-scoop C30 mix to get a little bit more sodium every bottle. I also alternated my gels with a C30 plus that included caffeine so that I wouldn't get too tired as the race went on. I never experienced flavor fatigue or an upset stomach for the entirety of the 100K. If you want to try Never Second, just head to neversecond.com. That's NEVER, the number 2.com. And use code SUBHUB25 for a 25% discount on all your orders. Well, some of our best trail phenoms right now are Nordic skiers, so you're on the right track joining the trail side of things. So let's kind of transition to that, are a part of the trail team this year, Andy Wacker's second team, and you are also the first person with a disability to make the team. So tell us about applying for that, talking with Andy, like the interview process, because we love Andy Wacker on this pod.
Oh, we love Andy Wacker. So when I quit track and field, I moved up to Bozeman, Montana to train with the Para-Nordic team, and we train 11 months out of the year. April's our only off month. A lot of roller skiing in the summer, but there is an opportunity to kind of do some other training. People might bike and swim and run. And my significant other is one of those people who does trail running, not for racing, but just for pure pain and like sadistic reasons. Like he created his own 100-mile route throughout Southwest Montana just to do with his friends to see if they could do it. Like he has no desire to compete. He just wants to challenge himself. And so when I had some flexibility to train in the summer, he introduced me to running on a trail. And I was like, I guess I've done this before, but I didn't really consider it trail running. and I live in a great place for it in Bozeman, Montana. And so I just started wanting to integrate it a little more into my summer training and did my first ever trail race, a little 10K, 2 summers ago, that is on the Continental Divide near Butte, Montana. It's called Wolfman's. They literally have people dressed as wolves who hide in the woods to scare you during the race. And you have to give them an estimate of your time ahead of time because it's so single tracked that it's individually started, like 15-second little waves to start people singly. And I had no idea. I hadn't run a 10K in so long, like officially, and I had no idea what it would be like on a trail. So I said my time would be like 2:30 or something. And I, during this race, had to excuse myself passing people on the left, about 55 participants. And I ultimately ran it in like hour 15, hour 20. And I just was like, oh, damn, okay, I guess I am okay at this. Slash, I did a poor estimate of where I'd be at. And I ultimately ended up volunteering and working with a program for inclusion around Run the Rut, which is a big trail race in Big Sky, Montana, put on by Mike Wolf and Mike Foote. And I just really liked what I saw at those two trail races. I thought it was a fun community. I liked that people that were like 50 years old were winning a lot of the races. I liked that it just felt like a large community. People were so nice on the trails. And so last summer, knowing I wasn't running track and field, I decided to hop in a couple of races. And one of them was Speed Goat, which is a UTMB race in Salt Lake City. And had just come back from working an event in Paris, terrible sleep, like had got done through some injuries of Nordic training. And I freaking looked to my right and at the start line, and Molly Seidel's at the start line with me. And I'm like, what are you doing at this race? And I'd met Molly before at Team USA for related events. And she's like, oh, I have a recovery day. I'm doing this race. I'm like, doing a 28K at one of the steepest ski resorts in the United States. But that race, I ultimately got 10th place in. Molly got second. And I was just like, wow, like for not having training specifically for running, like I did okay at this large event. And I did the Rut 20K, the inaugural one, this past year, and was in third place. And then unfortunately with a mile left, found someone who happened to be a friend who was having a heat stroke on the side of the trail and had to drop out. And I think Andy followed me on Instagram. I know we were definitely at Speed Goat at the same time. I don't think we met in person, but he followed me on Instagram. And I started doing some work with a buddy who's an on-sponsored trail runner named Zach Friedley. And he's an above-the-knee amputee. And he's now become my partner in crime for all things inclusion in trail running. And he liked my experience coming from a Paralympic side. He came from more so just trail running and is trying to figure out ways to integrate para athletes into trail running. And we kind of teamed up to start like looking at the trail running landscape. And I think he also chatted with Andy about me, and I saw Andy post on Instagram about the trail team, and I just looked at it and I asked Andy what it was. He explained it, and I decided to apply because while my focus is still Nordic skiing, like I don't see kind of what you alluded to, like some of the best trail runners right now are also having competitive Nordic seasons. And if I don't get to run through track and field, can I use this as my outlet for running? And I really like the dual sport thing. Like I think I'd get very sick of a sport if I only thought about it and only trained that way. And so I liked kind of that idea of hopping a little bit into trail running, seeing how it could supplement Nordic skiing. And I wanted to see if I trained a little more specifically, could I get really good at it? And I applied with Andy and just, yeah, talked about the stuff I wanted to do when it came to inclusion too in trail running, and how, you know, like my goal will be to be successful, but probably my biggest impact can definitely be through conversations with race directors and trying to figure out ways to integrate athletes with disabilities. And I was one of 6 who were selected. And I am super pumped. Like, we're going to be at a lot of the same races this summer. Andy has been an awesome mentor to help me just figure out like what is a good race for me to go to. Ultimately, his goal is to get us all sponsored by different brands and just really grow ourselves as runners. And I think it's cool to see that he really keeps the community within the trail team. So I know even next year when I won't be officially on the team, like I'll still be a part of the community at large.
Yeah, we are big fans of the trail team. Just like the mentorship from Andy and other runners, and just because I mean, I think I speak for MK and myself. Like when I entered the space, I had no idea. Maybe similar to, you know, trying to decipher the Paralympic trials process. Just went to the Google, tried to, you know, what is trail running? What races do I go to, etc.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it is
And
there's a lot in the sport going on, and having someone that can just kind of like help guide the boat down the river, I think is really helpful. And I mean, we've already seen, you know, it's not the only success metric of the trail team, you know, cue the sponsorships, but if you just look at that alone, they've been pretty successful just off of their
Yeah.
first year with all the athletes who have signed with Brooks, Nike, etc. So I think that's awesome.
if you pop it into a Google search, the only thing you'll find is Western States Barkley marathons. So
Netflix
Oh my gosh,
documentary.
yeah. Those are your options. So sorry.
Yeah, and it's probably
You can only
geolocation
do
too.
100-milers.
Geolocation,
Minimum.
but kind of we did want to touch upon this, you know, because I think it's incredible with Broken Arrow. They do have a advisory council, which includes a very diverse group of athletes, one of whom is yourself. And so that's pretty cool, like you entering the sport and already being able to kind of voice from your previous experience in other sports how to enable participation for athletes or individuals with disabilities. And so we are curious, like, what conversations have you already seen action upon, and what is kind of like the goal state of you being a member of the council?
Yeah. So Zach Friedley, the on-sponsored athlete, and I kind of put our heads together. He was working primarily with UTMB, and trying to get UTMB to have inclusion for people with disabilities. He had run a UTMB race, and he just didn't feel like the athletes with disabilities that were speaking up weren't happening in the way that they wanted to. And so Zach came to me this last fall and he said, I think the place we need to go is the Golden Trail series. He said, I think it's going to be way more receptive to kind of this concept of bringing in more athletes with disabilities. I think there's just a lot of opportunity here. How should we do this? So we kind of took some of his framework on what he had done with UTMB in terms of like goals of participation numbers, looking at how long it would take to ultimately get podiums, removing some barriers to entry, and looking at just accessible features at races. And we kind of developed a framework and reached out individually, the two of us, to all of the US Golden Trail series race directors. And a lot of them were super receptive. Like Tim from Mammoth was the first who latched on and was like, yeah, how many spots do we want? How are we going to do this? And has just been so awesome to work with. Similarly, Brendan and Ethan at Broken Arrow, we reached out to, and they were super excited to hear how Broken Arrow could get more involved and kind of make this come to life. And through those conversations, they invited me to join the advisory council. And it's been really cool because I obviously have such a perspective from disability and para. And I often forget about like the barriers to entry to people of color, or the barriers to entry for queer runners. And so it's cool to all be in a space where we're like fighting for our individual communities, but then we can connect on ways that certain things could be better for all of these communities, removing barriers to entry, and just really trying to make trail running ultimately like a little gimpier, have a lot more people of color running on the trails, have a lot more queer people running on the trails. And it's been just a really cool experience that also Brendan and Ethan from Broken Arrow see value in this. Like, I think just entering trail running just, I guess, really 2 years ago now, it did seem like a very white men's non-disabled sport. And that's who like all the sponsored runners were and all the people who got media attention. And that though is what I think is so cool about trail running is when you show up at the race and you see the thousands of runners, like for so many of them, it's not about winning the race or placing. They just want to finish the race. Like their Super Bowl is making the cutoff times at the different aid stations. And I think that's what's so unique about this sport and why it should be such a priority to elevate and highlight these communities. Because I think once the sport becomes more diverse, we all just become better people from learning from these different people from marginalized communities. And I'm just really excited to see where Golden Trail takes this. So 3 races this year from our conversations: Mammoth Trail Fest, Broken Arrow, and Headlands 27K, all offered at least 10 spots to athletes with disabilities just to try to get more people to the starting line. And we just want to see the numbers grow, because as the numbers grow, hopefully we can have that conversation to have a podium, and hopefully we can see about offering a new course option that would be accessible for someone who uses an adaptive piece of equipment. And I just think, as the sport grows, like these conversations hopefully grow with it, because trail running at the end of the day really should be for everyone. It shouldn't just be for those elite select few.
Yeah, I mean, the cool part about trail running is that everyone is on the starting line at the same time, right? And so we might as well keep swinging that door even wider. Keep opening it. So Dani will be out at Broken Arrow. She will be on at least one panel, maybe two, you said?
Yeah, Saturday
Cool.
afternoon at, I don't know, one of the stations.
She'll be out there, she'll be talking, but she's also racing, which is cool. You can check her in the 23K. But before we close up, we want to ask you about the Paralympic Roundup, which is something new that you've started, it seems, on your Instagram, just like highlighting Paralympic stories. So tell us more about that.
I felt like there is just not enough media. Like the fact that you're a track and field fan and probably follow places like Citius Magazine and things that give track and field news, but the Paralympic side of things aren't being covered. I just think there's such a lack of media, and Team USA and NBC are doing an awesome job at highlighting them, but those are really the only 2 sources you can go to for anything Paralympic news related. And so I just wanted to have conversations with athletes I know going to Paris. And I actually get to go to Paris this summer to work the Paralympics on the media side for Team USA. I actually contract with Team USA as a social media coordinator. So I've been really lucky that I get to see the space firsthand. But I just really felt like, on my own Instagram, which isn't huge, like I just wanted to be able to have conversations with athletes who maybe once every 4 years get a microphone put in their face at the games. Like even though they could be competing at World Cups or World Championships and doing really incredible things, like we really only get coverage during the games. And one of my biggest priorities personally is trying to make sure all athlete stories are told, because in the little coverage we get in Paralympic space, you're only probably going to hear about the Paralympic superstars, and they deserve media attention. But I find the stories also of the athlete who, kind of like myself, like barely qualified and squeaked in, to be also super interesting. And I think every athlete who reaches that level deserves to have a microphone and a camera in their face once in a while so they can showcase and talk about and use the platform that maybe they haven't been given. And so I've started talking to both retired athletes, current athletes, on what they're excited about for Paris, really. But my hope is to continue to expand the media space, working on some projects with other Paralympians on how we can get this to be more mainstream. I think we're really taking a note from women's sports right now. There's so many really awesome things happening within women's sports where we're seeing coverage of them we're seeing social media accounts really blow up talking about women's sports, but we don't see that for para. So can we take this model and kind of ride the wave of women's sports and try to get para to get its moment? Because it's coming. It's just, when will it come? And I think it's, once you watch the Paralympics or you meet an athlete like Zach on the trails, you see it and you get it. But you have to have that first experience with it to really get it and become a fan of it. And so we want to get more people into that. So myself and some other Paralympians are trying to work to create more media space for this. But we also recognize, Team USA athletes, Paralympic athletes are very lucky that our sport is a little more covered, just because of NBC and the games. But what about these athletes in sports that are not Paralympic recognized sports that are still doing really cool things? Like the Boston Marathon has a full Paralympic category where athletes with disabilities compete in classifications and are treated as elite athletes, as they should be at Boston. And that doesn't ever get covered as much maybe as it could. So we really want to create a space where not only Paralympic sports, but any disabled sports get the highlights and recognition. Because the harsh reality of this all is disability will touch all of us at some point in our lives, whether it's personally, through a family member, through a friend. It's really the only marginalized community that can take anyone at any day, and you never know when it will happen. And so showing support, but also just like, once you watch the sport like wheelchair rugby, or you think about that trail race you just ran, and then you think about, oh, someone just ran that on a running blade, like, it's really interesting and it's really intricate, and there's a lot of strategy and thought that goes behind it that might not in the non-disabled side of that sport. And so it's really, really interesting. And I think if people watch it, they'll just become fans of it at the end of the day.
Wheelchair rugby sounds insane.
Oh my gosh, you have to watch in Paris this summer. It's so sick. Just picture people literally ramming into each other with as much power and force in chairs.
Yeah. I mean, my sister-in-law was a rugby player, and so I've seen that without wheelchairs, and that sounds, I mean, it was already too brutal for me, but I'm gonna have to watch that.
Yeah. For your Paralympic roundup, is that solely on Instagram, or is it also going to be available on YouTube?
Instagram. I don't do YouTube. YouTube's too much work.
Okay, fair.
Cool.
So if you want to follow Dani, she is the One Arm Dan at Instagram. I love that Instagram handle. It is incredible. So if you want to follow along for the Paralympic roundup, that's where you can check it out. And just to kind of wrap this up, we know you're going to be at Broken Arrow, but what are some other trail races or the rest of your season going to look like? Sorry.
Ooh. The rest of the season, I should probably post it. So I'm doing the GoPro games with the trail team. Probably going to be just like an intro, kind of get the groove of racing on trails again. I'm doing a 10K at the GoPro games. Broken Arrow 23K. Think I have a spot for Sierra's Vinal. I'm trying to confirm that spot now.
Hell yeah.
And then I will be in Europe for a lot of the Olympics and the Paralympics working, and then I'll make a quick trip back. Signed up for the Rut 11K because the first year I tried the 28K, I sprained my ankle the week before. Then I did the 20K last year and couldn't finish the race because of the medical emergency. So I just keep dropping in distance and hope, maybe the VK will finally be my sweet spot if the 11K doesn't fly this year. And then I will be at Mammoth Trail Fest to do Mammoth. So I'm excited right now. It's definitely a give and take of how much racing do I do, considering this is my Nordic off season, and trying to find that balance there if it exists. But it's really fun to get to race all season long, considering in the winter is really when I only Nordic race. And I'm really excited to get to spend more time with Andy and the trail team, and just hopefully continue these conversations with race directors. So if you're a race director listening, please message me or Zach Friedley on Instagram so we can talk to you. We have a lot of different resources available to share on how you can make your race more acceptable to people with disabilities, make it have more access, stuff like that. But we're really just trying to shake up the trail scene and make it a little gimpier at the end of the day.
We love it.
We love
I'm
it.
stoked that you're going to Sears and all. That's so cool.
Yeah, that is
I
so
heard
cool.
it's really hard though.
It is, but it's so fun.
But it's such everyone needs to do that race. It's incredible. So that'll be an
Danny and
incredible
I-
experience.
Trail team camp there. Nearby the week before.
Perfect.
That was one thing. Andy was like, we'll have 2 camps, one in Colorado and one in Switzerland. I was like, Switzerland, I'm sold.
Okay. No, that'll be awesome. Danny and I were just talking about Sears and all yesterday. And like when you get to the hotel at the top of the climb, there's all these people with like huge cowbells like screaming in your face. And it's so you're like, thank you. Because you're like crying because you're done with the climb.
Oh gosh.
I love it.
See, I love a climb though. I think that's like the Nordic ski endurance in me
Yes.
is like I can climb all day. I should probably just switch to VKs only because I am the weakest downhill runner. Like I am so afraid of hurting myself downhill because I'm like, I can't roll my ankle. I can't roll my ankle. I can't screw up my knee. I can't screw up my knee. And so I love uphill running. And so also, if you're listening, DM me downhill advice. So
I was gonna say we'll teach you how to
downhill,
tape up your ankles.
That's my goal.
We'll teach you how to tape
know,
up your
I need
ankles and
to.
we'll you just have to the more you follow other people downhill, the better you'll get at it.
I know. It's just scary.
It
You
is
think
scary.
about all the ways it can go wrong.
Oh yeah. I just follow Danny downhill and I'm like, well, hopefully today's not the day that I die.
But I'm
But-
like, an uphill. I think, yeah, maybe that'll be my new thing next season, depending on how this season
Just
goes,
VKs.
is VKs only.
That's
Take
a
a
bold
chairlift
season.
down after.
I love that. Well, enjoy your time at Trail Team Camp next week. Tell everyone we said
Thank you.
hello. And we'll see you at Broken Arrow. We're excited to meet you in person.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm excited to meet you guys. Fellow pit viper athlete too.
Oh yes.
Let's
yes.
go.
But yeah, Dani, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, this has been the Sub Hub Podcast brought to you by Free Trail.